This is heavy.
Okay, let us begin on today's daf is Masechta Bava Metzia daf Kuf Yud Ches, and we're going to begin from daf Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Beis. The Gemara is going to begin by Amar Rav Acha, middle of the page. So the Gemara says like this: Amar Rav Acha bar Ada Mishmei de Ula. Rav Acha bar Ada said in the name of Ula. We're discussing over here of a collapsed building with two-floor building. One owns the top floor and one owns the bottom floor. So the bottom line of this whole Gemara is that it depends who's doing the building. If the bottom guy is doing the building, so if he wants to make it more stronger than it was before, we listen to him. We allow him to do that by using better material. If he wants to make it weaker than before, that means it's less strong on the bottom, then we don't listen to him. And the same thing goes with the top. The top guy, if he's building his half of the building, so if he's going to make it heavier than it was before, then we don't allow him to do that. If he makes it lighter than it was before, then we allow him to do that. So that's basically the whole Gemara over here. If the guy on the bottom who's building up, who's doing his half of the building, so he's building up the first floor, and he wants to use gevil. Gevil is a wider type of brick, so and it's more sturdier. Shaimanlai, then we allow him to do that. Because if he's going to use a weaker type of brick, so then we don't allow him to ain't shaimanlai. We don't allow him to do that because it's too flimsy. Bekvisen, if he wants to use, let's say, that's like a type of half a brick, and the thickness of it will be, the thickness of the wall will be 4 tfachim. Rashi says, shaimanlai, we allow him. Bilveinim, if he wants to use a regular brick, ain't shaimanlai, we don't listen to him. Again, presumably that this is not going to hold up. If he wants to roof with cedar wood, then shaimanlai, that's probably the best thing to do, right? Cedar wood is excellent. But Rashi says arazim stays longer than sycamore, and it's more sturdy. It's a sturdier type of wood. So if he wants to use the roof of his first floor apartment, but arazim, he wants to use cedar wood, shaimanlai, we allow him. But if he wants to use sycamore, ain shaimanlai, we don't allow him. Lamayit bechaloinis, if he wants to use less windows. So if there's less windows, what's taking the place of the windows? Wall. So then shaimanlai, we listen to him because now it's a sturdier building. Laharbis bechaloinis, he wants to add windows, ain shaimanlai, we don't allow him to do that. Lahagbia, if he's making it higher, ain shaimanlai, we don't listen to him. Lama'et shaimanlai, but we do listen to him if he wants to make it smaller. Because again, if he makes it higher, so then he's causing the guy on the top when he walks to his second floor apartment, he has to take extra steps. So therefore, we don't allow him to do that. And also, a lower building is more stronger than a higher building. So therefore, we don't allow him to do that. So now we go back to now we go to the opposite case. Elyon Shabal Lashanis. Remember, the first guy built his floor. He built his first floor. So now the second guy is building his second floor. And so again, it's a collapsed building and then trying to replace it. So the Elyon of Baal Lashanis, if the top guy wants to make a change, it can change. Begazis, if he wants to use something lighter, shaimanlai. Bigvil, if he wants to use something heavier, ain't shaimanlai. Bigvisim, if he wants to use something wider, ain't shaimanlai. Bilveinim, if he wants to use something narrower, shaimanlai. Ba'arazim, if he wants to use cedar wood, ain't shaimanlai. We don't, because it's heavier. B'sikma, shaimanlai, if he wants to roof his top with sikma, then we do listen to it. L'rabbeis b'chaloinos, if he wants to add windows, shaimanlai, because then it becomes a lighter building. Lamayit bechaloinis, if he wants to add less windows, ain't shaimanlai, we don't listen to it. L'hagbia, if he wants to make it higher, ain't shaimanlai, we don't listen to him. Lamayit, if he makes it smaller, shaimanlai. Okay, you have to see again the same idea. All of this is the same idea. If the top guy is making the weight of the building less, we allow him to do that. If he's adding to the weight of the building, then we don't allow him to do that, because so that the top guy, the bottom guy can stop the whole new construction. Now the Gemara says, "Ein lo zev lo zev." Let's say the building collapsed, the 2-floor building collapsed, and nobody has money to repair it. So what's the din? What's the din with the real estate underneath it? You see, they're going to sell the property. It's a collapsed building. Nobody has the money to pay for new construction. So now, who owns the real estate? It was a 2-floor building. So Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Reb Nosson says, Tachten noitel shnei chalakim. The guy on the bottom takes 2/3. The elyoin shlish. The guy on the top will take 3/3, 1/3 of the sale. So they sell the property. And the guy on the bottom, since he was closer to the ground, he gets 2/3 of the real estate. And the guy on the top takes 1/3. The others say, the bottom guy takes 75%. And the top guy takes a quarter. So it's a machlokes between Rab Nosson and the Acherim. Comes along Amar Rabba. Rabba said, Nekoit Rab Nosson biyad. Paskin like Rab Nosson. The Dayan, he was a judge and he has experience. And he understood the depth of the law. And the law is that 2/3 belong to the guy on the bottom and 1/3 belongs to the guy on the top. Kisabar, he holds, Kama mafsid aliyah babayis tilsa. How much by adding another floor, the age of the building loses 1/3 of its longevity. That's what he's saying. So therefore, Hilkach Islay Tfilsa. So therefore, his reasoning is that the top guy really owns 1/3 of the real estate, and 2/3 of the real estate belong to the one on the bottom. That was his reasoning. So next Mishnah, the Chain Beis Habad. Imagine there's a underground or olive pit, Shubana Besela, that's built into, let's say, a cave. And what's on top of the cave? The Kina Achas Agabav, and there is a garden on top of it. Now, one guy owns the garden, and one guy owns the olive press. The Nifchas, and the roof of the olive press got a hole in it. So now the guy on the bottom, the guy with the garden cannot plant there anymore because there's a hole. So the owner of the garden can come down and start planting in the olive press, because it's, I guess, the olive press's responsibility to repair the roof. Keep it until the guy on the top starts. The guy who owns the olive press repairs the roof, so that the person who has the garden could totally plant on top of the olive press. Next, the Mishnah says like this: you have a tree and a wall that fell into the Rishus Harabim. When they did damage, they're potter from paying. Okay, they fell into the Rishus Harabim and they did damage. You're potter from paying. They gave time for the person to cut the tree down, and to knock the wall down. And so therefore, everybody, the Bezdin recognized that this is a flimsy wall. So they gave him an order to do the repairs, right? V'naflin, it fell down. So b'soich hazman, if it's within the period of time that he was supposed to clear and fix or remove the tree, potter, because it's not his fault. I mean, he didn't have enough time to straighten things out, to hire a company to cut the tree or clear the wall. La'achar, but if enough time passed, that after being warned by Bezdin, this person that to clear his wall or knock his tree down, and he did not do so, and then it fell into a Rishus Harabim and damaged somebody, chayev, then the person is held liable. A man who had a wall next to the garden of his friend, the nofal, and the wall fell down. And the person whose wall fell down fell into the garden. The person who owns the garden tells the person who owns the wall, "Panei avanecha, get rid of your stones. It's in my garden. Your wall fell down. Please clear it up." And the person who owns the wall says, we go to the top of Kufi Chesam Ralph. Higiucha, you can keep the stones. Ein Shoimela, we don't listen to it, because if the guy who has the garden doesn't want it, he doesn't want it. It's still the responsibility of the person who owns the wall to clean up after his mess. Mishikibel olav, but if once you accepted the deal, that the guy in the garden says, okay, if you want, I'll keep the bricks and I'll own it. So then what happens if the guy who owns the wall realized that he wants his stones back? After you cleared it up, here's your expenses back. Give me back my stones. You cleared it up. You're right. I'll pay you for the cleanup work, but please give me back my stones. So then already it's too late because the guy on the garden, by cleaning up his stones, he already now owns those stones, so he doesn't have to give it back. Ain't shemalai. You don't have to give it back if he doesn't want it. If he doesn't want to, that's it. He doesn't have to give it back. Now the Mishnah says, if a person hires a worker. Now, when you hire a worker, the idea is you're going to pay him cash, right? Because that's part of the agreement, right? So he had him work with straw. And the employer says, the employee says, give me my payment. And the person says, Tol masha go take whatever I owe you, take it in the form of the straw. So instead of paying him cash, he's telling him, take from the field, take from the straw. Ain't shaimelite. We don't listen to him. Mishikibel olav. But let's say the employee accepted the agreement and started taking from the straw as payment for his services. And the owner and the employees realized that, you know what, he would rather have the straw back. And he told him, hey, here's your cash wages, and give me back my straw. Ain't shaimelai. We don't listen to him. Because once the employee accepted the proposition, and he started taking his payment in straw, so then there's no backsies over here. The person has to give it. That's it. The employee has a right to keep it and doesn't have to give it back to the employer. So the Gemara talked about before, if there was a hole in the roof of the olive press. So, and then it's the responsibility of the olive press to repair it so that the person with the garden can continue planting on top of his olive press, because that was the arrangement. That's the way it was built. So nivchas saw if there was a hole and it collapsed. How much is a hole? A collapsing hole. Rav Alma Baruba. Rav says most of it has to collapse. Shmuel says ba'arba 4 tvachim. So the Gemara explains. Rav Alma Baruba. Rav says most of it has to collapse. Alba ba'arba. If it's just 4 tvachim, that's not enough to require and to allow the, so to speak, the owner of the olive press to go down, the owner of the garden to go down and start planting into somebody's olive press. It's too small of a hole. Adam Zereya Chetzio Lamata v'Chetzio Lamala. So whatever he's missing, if he's missing 4 tvachim, so let him plant just 4 tvachim into the olive press, but the rest he should continue planting on top of the olive press, which is still good. Shmuel says ba'arba, even if it falls 4 tvachim, so then the whole garden can move into the olive press, because ein odom zreya chetzi lamata b'chetzi lamala. We don't allow, a person is not comfortable planting part on top of a roof, on top of the roof of the olive press, and part on the bottom. So even if there's a minor hole, 4 tefachim, already, if the guy in the olive press did not repair that, then the garden can move to the downstairs to the olive press. And we saw the same idea of two people have a 2-family home. One lives on the bottom floor, the other lives on the top floor, and there's a hole. How much is the hole required? If the person rented the top floor, if there's a hole, he can move down into the landlord's apartment on the first floor. We saw that yesterday. So it seems that Rav and Shmuel have the same argument over here by the olive press, and had the same argument yesterday by the 2-floor house, Utsricha. So we need the arguments to be reiterated in each and every case. The Ashmi'in and Dira, if it would say that the argument between Rav and Shmuel of Ruba and 4 Tfachim applies by a residence, Shmuel, in a residence, Shmuel says, Shmuel is certainly said that a person wouldn't want to live part of his stuff on the second floor and keep just minor things on the first floor. A person wants to live on one floor. Therefore, if there's a minor hole, Shmuel says that the second floor guy can move into the apartment of the first floor guy. But when it comes to planting, people plant in different locations. So maybe a 4 tefach hole would not be enough to allow the person with the garden to go plant on the first floor, in the olive press. Let us say, Rav, would he agree to Rav? So that's it. If we just say in this case, in the second case, that Rav said you need the whole thing to be, it would just say by the olive press, Bahach Kama Rav. Okay, by the olive press, Rav says you have to have most of the olive press to be collapsed in order to allow the person to move and plant his garden in the olive press. When it comes to residence, he will agree to Shmuel's idea that if there's a small hole, the guy on the second floor has to remain on the second floor, and if it's just a 4 tvachim, so let him keep his refrigerator on the first floor. Maybe he would agree to Shmuel I'm sorry. Even if it was a small tefach, person doesn't like to live in 2 places. Keep his refrigerator on the first floor and have his living quarters on the second floor. So maybe even if small hole, Rav would be moided that the guy on the second floor could move into the apartment on the first floor. Tzricha, that's why you had to tell me that story. So v'kamazman Bezdin. What is the amount of time that Bezdin gives a person to clear away rubble? Not clear away rubble, but to clear away a shaky tree or a shaky wall. That's 30 days, a 30-day process. Now, they give him 30 days. The Mishnah says if someone's wall was next to next to a garden and it fell into somebody's gardens, Hamid Kani Safe in the end of that story, the guy says that apparently the guy who owns the garden cleared away the stones, and the guy who owns the stones wants it back. So he's saying, here's your expenses for removing the stones, and here's your expenses for removing the stones, and I want my stones back. So the person who cleared it away, the one who owns the garden, does not have to give it back. Michlal, the penine asking, only if you removed it. So time with the penine, it's only because he cleared away the stone, holoi penine. But if he didn't clear away the stones, loi, then we don't allow him to do that, and he has to return the stones. Amai. So why does he have to return the stones? V'tiknele sodehu, let his field, which is the garden where the stones fell into, acquire those stones just like that. The Omer Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina said, a courtyard, a garden of a person can make an acquisition whether he agrees, even if he's not aware of it. Something falls into your garden, you automatically acquire it. So why do we need him to make like hagbah, lift up the stones and clear it away? Even if he didn't clear it away, the guy who owns the garden should be able to keep it. Answers the Gemara, Hani Mili, when do we say such a story? So if somebody wants you to acquire something, let's say somebody throws a get into the courtyard of the Isha, of the woman, so of course she acquires it. But because the guy wants her to acquire it. Over here, the owner of the stones wanted to delay it. So he said, if you could keep it, but really he never meant to sell it, never meant to give it. In that case, the courtyard would not make any acquisition because the person who put the stone, whose wall it was, did not intend to allow the other person to acquire it. Now the Gemara says, it gave you a story of the straw of the employee with the straw, and it gave you the story of the stones falling into the chatzar. Which is tell you the story about the person whose wall fell into somebody's garden. If he says you can keep it, we don't listen to him. Because he never hired, he doesn't owe anything to the guy whose garden it is. The isli agar gabe, maybe since he's required to pay the employee, so maybe I might think that you do listen to him. The Almare in Shay Mari Rashvase Pari. You can pay your worker whatever you want. So therefore, maybe from the get-go, if he says take straw, we would say, you know what, that's a form of payment. So we would force the employee to take the straw, even though he was expecting cash. So that's why it has to tell me that employee, when you hire an employee, you can't make an arrangement, oh, I'm going to pay you in straw. The arrangement always is in cash. And if the employee doesn't agree to that, there's no way around that. It doesn't work. We don't listen to him. If we just say over here, if we would just say over here that when he accepted upon himself, we don't listen to him, because the reason why by the employee, if once the employee accepted the straw as payment, so there's no backsies. In other words, the employer can't say, oh, I want to pay you in cash now, because he was required to pay the employee, and the employee accepted it. By the stones, the Leslie Agragabe, the stones that fell into the garden, the one that owns the garden was not owed anything by the person with the stones. So let's say we will give the person who owns the stones a chance to get it back. If he wants to get it back and pay the expenses of the rubble removal, then we would force the gardener who did it to return it back to him. So we would say that you do listen to him. Tzricha, that's why we need to have both cases written in the Mishnah. Now the Mishnah says, the Brisa says, if you make up with an employee to pay him in straw, ain't shaymalai. We don't listen to you. But we learned in the Brisa shaymalai that you do listen to a person when you make up with an employee, and you could force the employee to take his wages in straw. So how do you reconcile the Brisa with our Mishnah? Our Mishnah says you can't make up with an employee to take his wages in straw. Rav Nachman said, "Loi kasha, it's not difficult. Kan b'shaloi, kan b'shal chaveri. If you hire an employee to work in your field, then you cannot force him to take anything but cash. You cannot force him to take straw. But if you hired him to work in your friend's field, so maybe we go lenient that you don't have to pay him in cash, you can pay him in straw." That was Rav Nachman's answer. Amalei Rava Rav Nachman. So Rava said to Rav Nachman, "B'shaloi my tama. What's the reason why when you hire a worker to work in your field, you can't pay him in straw? Because you promised him wages. You promised him to pay him. If you hire him to work in your friend's field, well, basically, you are the hiring person. You're the one that's responsible to pay him. So who cares if he's working in your field or your friend's field? You'll still have to pay him in cash. The Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, so if you hire a friend to work in your friend's field, unbeknownst to your friend, then you're responsible to pay the worker. So therefore, it doesn't matter whether you hired him to work in your own field or you hired him to work in your friend's field. You made a commitment to the employee that you're going to pay him. You can't say, I'm going to pay you in straw. You can only pay him in cash. So that wouldn't be a good idea to reconcile the Brisa, which he says that Shaimelai, we listen to the employer, with our Mishnah that says, Ain't Shaimelai. Elam Rav Nachman, so Rav Nachman answered, like Kash, it's not difficult. Kam b'shaloi, kam b'shel hefker. If you hire him in your own field, then you have to pay him in cash. Kan b'shel hefker. But if it's hefker, so then you hired him in something that really doesn't belong to you. So as soon as the employee picks up the straw, the employee is kind of the straw. So then you can say, oh, instead of me paying you, you already got paid by lifting up the straw. So therefore, in that case, he can say, take your payment in straw. Eisvei Rav Nachman, so Rav said to Rav Nachman, Metzias Poila Atzmai, Emisai Bisman Shamalai Bay Bais Nakashimi, Hayoma Adim Hayom. Avalim Omalai Aseimim Loch Hayom, Metzias Lebalabayis. If you hire a worker just to deal with Hefker stuff, that means whatever the worker is going to do is on behalf of the employer. And therefore, as soon as a person lifts up the straw, it doesn't belong to the employee, it belongs to the employer because he was hired to work for the day. So therefore, how could you say that when you hire an employee to work in Hefker stuff, the employee can get to keep the item that he picked up? Really, he's picking it up on behalf of his employer. And if there's an employer involved, then the employer is required to pay cash. He can't get away with not paying cash. So Ella Omar Rav Nachman, like Kash, it's not difficult. We're both talking about, our mission is talking about you hired an employee to work in Hefker stuff, to clear up, let's say, Hefker straw. Kan Bahagbo, if you ask the employee to lift up the straw, so when the employee lifts up the straw, it belongs to the employer. So now the employer has to pay cash. Kan Bahabot, if you just hire a worker to just stare and observe the hefker stuff, but not to lift it up, or to sweep it away, but not to lift it. So then the employer doesn't really own that straw. So that gives an opportunity, a choice for the employer to say, here, take the straw, and that's your payment. That's your payment. So that's your payment. And the Gemara says like this, Alma Rabba, that's what it says. Let's do the Rashi. Let's just so it gets clear. Both our Mishnah and the Brisa is discussing when you're hiring a worker to work in Hefker straw. Masnisen, our Mishnah is Kishaschari Lulka Tavin Bahakbo de Poil. When you hire the worker to lift the straw to lift the straw. Therefore, if you are hiring somebody, you are responsible to pay him, and therefore you pay him in cash. Ubraisa, but the Brisa is Kisari Lemeleches Habota. You're hiring the worker just to stare at it, or to watch the straw, going lishmar, to watch it, or so to throw it from a high place, sweep it from a high place to a low place. The lake Hagba, so the worker didn't lift the straw. The Amalei, Akati, the employer says, Akati loiza kebe'ena. I didn't get this straw, doesn't belong to me. So instead of me paying you in cash, zil atzchei, you should take care of the straw, and the straw should belong to you. And therefore, that would reconcile the brisa, which says that if the employer says, I want to pay you with straw, you would listen to him. And our Mishnah is talking about where the straw actually belongs now to the employer, so therefore the employer has the responsibility to pay in cash. Okay, we'll stop over here. As Hashem.